Hi, I'm Tom. I had my solar PV and battery system installed at the beginning of 2023. So with the system having completed its first full year, I thought it would be useful to just go back and look at the amount of power that it generated, how much that's saved, and then sort of take a look at what the impact it has had on our kind of average unit rate that we pay for electricity. Another thing that I wanted to take a look at was the comparison between what the projected performance of the system was against the actual performance of the system, because that's something that a lot of people kind of, I think, wrestle with sometimes, is because you kind of can't really predict with much accuracy maybe how a system is actually going to perform. So I just thought that would be handy to throw in at the very end. So what I've done is I've prepared a little PowerPoint presentation really, and I'll just run through some of the key figures and then just go through the numbers at the end. So if we start with a breakdown of kind of what the current system I have is. So I have a 4.8 kilowatt array up on two parts of my ceiling. So that's broken into 8 panels and 4 panels. So the 8 panels are up on the main part of the roof with 4 panels on the extension. The system faces sort of southish. I think it's southwest, but it's pretty south. We've got a Solex 3.6 kilowatt hybrid inverter connected to that. In addition, then I've got 5.8 kilowatt hours of battery storage, and that system's got a 90% depth of discharge. Due to the positions of the arrays, especially with the main array, there's a lot of shading from the neighbour's house. They've got 2 big tall chimneys, and when the sun is low, the top of their roof does actually shade the bottom of some of the panels. So to help mitigate the effect of that, I had Tygo optimizers installed. In terms of our tariff, we've been on Octopus Intelligence Go for a long time. We were on Octopus Go, and then as soon as we got an EV in 2022, we were able to switch over to Octopus Go. So that gives us 2 rates. So it's currently 29.9 peak and 7.5p off peak. Now, one of the key differences with the Octopus Intelligence is that in addition to the fixed hours for peak and off peak being 11:30 at night to 5:30 in the morning, one of the kind of nifty things that Intelligence does is as soon as you plug your EV in, it will calculate a sort of charging schedule. So it will give you the different slots in which it's going to charge the car. And sometimes, a lot recently, you'll get additional slots. So for example, you might plug your car in on Sunday morning. You know, you've just come back from maybe going for a walk or something, so you plug your car in, and if it's a windy day or there's quite a lot of solar being generated in the grid, Octopus might decide to give you off peak from that moment on until 6 a.m. the next morning, and they kind of vary and they depend. Unfortunately, I can't get, or I don't have access to the kind of historical rates that's been provided, so I'm only able to do all the math and all the kind of calculations using the fixed bands. Whatever the figures are, I'll kind of bring that up again when we come to going through the kind of peak and off peak breakdown. In addition to being on the Octopus Intelligence Go, I've also been able to get onto this outgoing Octopus 12-month fixed. So that's a special export tariff. Now, when I had the solar installed, I made a bit of a mistake and I didn't get the export stuff set up. So I was generating some surplus solar and I wasn't getting paid for that at all, as I hadn't filed the necessary paperwork with Octopus. So when I filed all that paperwork, when you are exporting and you're not on a particular export tariff, you take advantage of something called the Smart Export Guarantee, or the SEG, and that pays you 4.1p for every kilowatt hour. And then I think in around September, Octopus invited me to join their Octopus Outgoing, and that pays 15p per kilowatt hour exported. So that's quite an increase. It's almost 4 times as much. That switch, that had a big impact on our behaviours and how we were using the solar system, and I'll run through some of that later on. And then to kind of give you an idea of the overall cost of the system, it was a little over £11,000 in total, and that was, yeah, so that was kind of what we paid to have it all installed. Just a quick look at the arrays. So as I said, there's two. This is the main array, and you can see the shading from the neighbour's chimneys and the neighbour's roof. This was taken in, I think, either very late December or very early January when the panels were being installed. And then that's the secondary array on the extension. So this array also suffers from a lot of shading, and that comes from my own house. So as the sun kind of tracks across the sky and then it clears the house, the panels will be shaded kind of vertically, and then eventually they'll come into full sunlight. I mentioned at the start what I wanted to do was take a look at what was estimated. So this is a piece of information that I got from the proposal, the kind of the spec that I got from the installer. They reckon we'll generate about 4,000 kilowatts or kilowatt hours, and then save about £911 in the first year. Now I think these rates go up because I think they're designed to track inflation and things like that. And maybe they're anticipating changes in rates and things, but that's roughly. So we expected to save about £900 and generate 4 megawatt hours. So we'll do a comparison at the end and see how we've tracked along against that. In terms of the habits that we have, or the way that we use our energy, one of the big ones is that I heat almost all of our hot water using the immersion element that's in my Mixergy tank. Now the reason I do that is twofold. The first reason being that my gas rate at the time, and I'm fixed into that at the moment, is about 8p a kilowatt hour, and my off-peak electricity is 7.5p a kilowatt hour. And when I factor in the efficiency of the boiler versus the efficiency of the element, it's cheaper per kilowatt hour to heat with electricity. It takes a lot longer because obviously it's only putting in 3.3 kilowatts of heat as opposed to the boiler, which could put in, 10 or 15. But because I'm charging it off peak anyway, we don't really notice that. So it'll turn the immersion heater on, I think it's around 3:30 in the morning, and then it charges kind of 65% of the tank. So that's, I think we're looking at about 140 litres or something like that. Any out of band heating, so if we need to do some heating in the evening or something like that, that's usually the boiler. So the Mixergy is set to kind of know which heat source to use. In total, I think we use about 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in the year, and that's just for hot water. Next is kind of the EV. The EV, we switched our EV charging habits. At the beginning of the year, I was using I've got a Zappi charger, so I was exporting, or I was using the surplus solar to charge the car. So anything that was extra was initially going into the hot water tank through an eddy, and then anything beyond that was going into the car via the Zappi. Now that was all fine and dandy until I switched over to the 15p rate for the Octopus outgoing, and once I switched to the 15p rate, all of a sudden it made almost no sense to put the surplus into the car, because if I exported a unit, I could import 2 units that evening or the next day for the same, or it would basically pay for it. I essentially stopped charging the car with the surplus solar, and I jimmied around with the water, so there's a little bit of intelligence in there, and what it will do is it will divert some of the power into the tank and heat probably 40 or 50 litres of water. So that's just enough if we want to give the kids a bath or something. And then once it's kind of reached that percentage of the tank, it'll then start diverting the rest, or start exporting the rest out to the grid. Now obviously I made that change in sort of September when the kind of generation figures were starting to drop off. So I think as we move into this summer 2024, I think that behavior, we should see a large increase in the amount that I'm exporting. So we'll do another one of these videos in sort of 2025. Another change is kind of the habits that we have. So we've started taking advantage of the off-peak rates. So we've started to load shift a lot more, and we kind of do that manually. So that will be delayed start on the washing machine, delayed start on the dishwasher, trying to, as I said, heating the hot water off peak. Obviously I'm charging the battery, so I'm doing some load shifting that way, so we'll be charging the battery off peak as well. And then we've got things like, we've got a Lomi, which is like a compost maker, and we'll make sure we turn that on, if possible, after 11:30. And then, as I said, with the Octopus Intelligence Go, when you plug the car in and you get the additional slots, we're very conscious of that. So if I plug the car in and I get some slots for maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll wait. So we might say, well, don't put the tumble dryer on until there's an off-peak slot. And we are then, obviously, with the solar, again, conscious of what the export rate is, and how much surplus is being exported. So if there's a good chunk of surplus and we spot that there's a good chunk of surplus, that's when we might quickly put a load of washing on, because there's going to be, it's a nice sunny afternoon, so there's going to generate loads of solar. And again, because of the disparity between the peak rate of nearly 30p and the export rate 15p, for every unit that we use, we sort of save 15p if we can get it from the solar. But as I said, that's only changed in September. So this year it will be a very different picture, I think. So to look at our import for the whole year, we've imported a little over 5.6 megawatt hours. Obviously, you can see we went away on holidays here in January, so that's why there's a dip. But you can see the impact of the solar as we generate more and more, the amount we import dips, and then it goes back up. So we're always going to have some for things like the hot water. And I think at that point it was probably charging the battery a little as well. And then we had a huge rise here in December, and that was due to I'd made a mistake configuring the underfloor heating. So in total, 5.56 megawatt hours imported, and the vast majority of that, I'm very happy to say, we've managed to do off peak. So we've managed 4.2 megawatt hours off peak. Now again, these figures don't impact or don't reflect the special Octopus Intelligent Go slots. I just don't have access to that information. I don't expect it would be very much, but I'm hoping this year that I can try and get a more exact figure for that. Solar production then, that follows pretty much what you'd expect. January's a little bit lower because the system wasn't commissioned until mid-December. And then you can see July is a lot lower than May, and the weather in July was absolutely miserable. Last year it just rained, so it was overcast quite a lot. But we did manage to generate 3.86 megawatt hours, which is, I think, a pretty respectable figure, especially given the shading and given the orientation. In terms of export, I mentioned at the beginning that I didn't actually set it up until there's probably March, and that went up and down. And you can see we did manage quite a lot, and I think that was again because we went away. I think we were away on holidays, and that was exporting quite a lot, and then it just falls away to almost nothing. So I took advantage then of the change in the export tariff around then, so that would have been September. In total, again, 506 kilowatt hours exported, so that's a mix of the smart export guarantee and the Octopus tariff. So to compare the 2023 with the previous year, we've managed to import 1,400 kilowatt hours less, about the same in terms of peak and off peak, or in terms of the same as off peak and off peak, but we did manage to reduce the amount of on peak electricity. That was cut roughly in half. So that meant the ratio between peak and off peak increased, so up to 75%. No solar in 2022 because the system wasn't there. And then we've got our, so this figure represents the total generated versus minus what we exported. So this is what we actually consumed ourselves. Now that consumption could be directly, or it would have went into the battery. And we would have ultimately consumed that then at that point or later on. So again, quite good. But you can notice here that even without the drop, there is a discrepancy between the totals here. 2023, we consumed 9 megawatt hours, which is an increase of 20% over the previous year. That is partially explainable by the fact that we didn't get our EV until March of 2022, and I didn't switch the hot water over to electricity until about the same time. The total consumption in 2022 is slightly skewed because it jumped quite a lot as soon as we got the EV and I started using electricity for the hot water. So the 20% doesn't really come as a surprise. The breakdown is pretty good. So we managed nearly 40% directly from solar. 47% came from off-peak and the remainder was on-peak. So that's not bad. I'd like to make the on-peak a bit smaller, but I'm pretty happy with that. If I then look at what we sort of spent, if I add all of this up, we come to 315 quid from all the off-peak we've used. We've £416 from all the on-peak. So again, figures are pretty close. And then the solar, obviously costs us £0 per every unit. So if we add all that together, we come to an effective rate of 8p, which I think is really, really good because it is basically the off-peak rate. So that means that we're essentially paying the off-peak rates nearly for all of the electricity in total, which is fantastic. Now, if I take the solar out of the equation, the unit rate is closer to 14p. So this represents, and as it represents quite a significant chunk, does have quite a big impact on the overall unit rate. So when it comes to working out the savings, I'm making the assumption that all the solar PV that gets generated would be consumed during a time when we would be paying peak prices anyway. I think that's a fair assumption because for Octopus Intelligence Go, the peak period is essentially 5:30 in the morning to 11:30 at night. So that's when you'll be generating solar anyway. If power does get pushed into the battery, just based on, as I said, with the shading, there's a big forest behind the house as well. So by the time we come into the evening and the power from the panels has dropped down, we'll be sucking all that power out of the battery. And from kind of experience and sort of anecdotally, we'll have mostly drained the battery by the time we're getting into the off-peak periods anyway. So I think based on that, I think it's a fair assumption that we're going to be saving money at a peak rate. So if we take a look in total, paying with the 29.9p in mind, we have reduced our bill by essentially £1,000. So it's £1,004, give or take, which I'm very, very happy with. That is quite a big saving. And then the payments we get from the export, I've split them into two because of the way that I was on the SEG and Octopus Go, or the outgoing Octopus. So we saved 15p. Oh, we saved £15 with what was exported prior, and then £18 after. So I think in total, if I had been on outgoing all the way, this would have been about £75. So in total, we would have been looking at, getting close to £1,100 saving, which is 10% of the installation cost. If we now look at, again, we'll come back to the estimated system performance, and you can see we generated a little less than what was expected. Some of that I can put down to missing kind of the first 2 weeks of January. Now I know we wouldn't be generating a lot in January anyway. I think it would have been reasonable to assume we might have got 20 or 30 kilowatt hours, which would have brought us up a lot closer to this projected figure. So we're not too far away. And then in terms of the savings, we're a little bit ahead. So we've come out about 100 quid ahead. So the export payments weren't quite, I think, even on the SEG. And bear in mind, I hadn't even set it up properly. We were never going to make that £43 figure. But the electricity savings here, we've actually come out, about 140 quid ahead. So that's fantastic. So all in all, the system is performing. It's kind of it's kind of where I expected it to be. I had hoped, to be honest, that I'd be looking at less than a 10-year payback, which is kind of what I'm looking at now. And I think with a bit more focus on load shifting and a bit more trying to use the battery to load shift from peak to off peak. I think that will help. The increased export is obviously going to have a massive impact on that. So as we come into the summer, I'll be taking full advantage now of the export. I've also decided to shift the behavior, so I'm now going to start charging the battery to nearly 100%. I think 95% is what I've set it to. So I'm going to charge, well, I am charging the battery. I changed this a few weeks ago. So I'm going to charge the battery during the off-peak period, and then I can carry the house through till the solar starts generating, and then it'll be a lot less will go into the battery, I hope, and that means we can start exporting more to take advantage of that 15p rate. We're also going to try and experiment with trying to load shift even more. So that's maybe taking advantage of more automations in the house and making sure that things that we can run very late at night or very early in the morning, we are doing. So that may be using something like a little Zigbee button here to push the start button on the tumble dryer, for example, which isn't something, the tumble dryer we have, for example, you can't delay its start. You just turn it on. So something like that might take advantage. It will certainly help with something like the Lomi, or that's got no automations on it or whatever. So that's something I'll be experimenting with, especially now as we're coming into the solar generating period. So that's it. I've kind of waffled on quite long enough, I think, now. So I'm going to wrap up. All in all, yeah, I'm pretty happy with where we are. Yeah, and bring on 2024's performance. Yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. If you've any questions at all about my numbers and my setup, or you want to know, just please use the comments. And full disclosure here, I have recorded a version of this video which I put out a couple of days ago, and I got completely made a complete mess of the calculations, and I overestimated my spend. So this is kind of a correction to that, which I think is a bit more accurate. But yeah, if you do want to know more about my methodologies or how I've arrived at that figure, please use the comments. Otherwise, that's it. I better stop talking now. I'm Tom, and thanks for watching.